I'm going to talk to you about how to be a captivating storyteller. Human beings are made of flesh, blood, and bone, but they're also made of stories. We all enjoy listening to stories, reading them, watching them. But above all, even though we may not know it, we like creating and telling stories. So when you tell your friend a secret, you're telling a story. When you share information, you're telling a story. Whether you complain or congratulate, it's all a story. One of my earliest memories is of my mother telling me long made-up stories to last through each Sunday afternoon. My love of stories grew as I grew up, till I realized I probably wanted to be a storyteller. At that time, I thought all it took was having a good story. Stories are powerful because they help us connect with each other through emotion and a shared experience. And when we connect, we can make incredible things happen. We can see another person's point of view. We can resolve conflict. We can laugh together. We can explain something to the other who did not understand before. When we connect, we create a universe of possibilities that did not exist earlier. I wanted to become a storyteller because I wanted to be the person that created the space to allow understanding, healing, creativity, curiosity, inspiration, delight. But I learned soon enough that having a good story, or even a great story, is never enough. What you need to do is you need to know your audience. The better you know your audience, the easier it is to connect to them, to make them care. So when you're telling a story, go find out what interests your audience, what bores them, what scares them, what do they know, what do they not know, what makes them cry, what makes them laugh. By the way, the hardest thing to do is to tell somebody a funny story. It is every speaker's nightmare that you're going to stand on stage and tell a joke and nobody is going to laugh. But even worse is when you crack a joke at a point in your story where you're really trying to be very serious, but you haven't realized it. To give you an example, it is only in India that the phrase passing out is supposed to communicate the graduation of students from schools and universities. Everywhere else in the world, passing out means fainting, losing consciousness. So I can only imagine what it would be like to use the phrase, if we were to use this phrase in an audience of non-Indians, what they would think about schools and universities in India, which every year, with regularity, every batch has all these people just passing out en masse, So we need to know our audience. But you also need to be invested in your story. You should want to tell it. You should be so much on fire with the desire to tell it that you can't but tell it. This allows you to tell your story very freely. Because if you were not so committed to telling your story, if you were not concentrated on telling your story, you would be concentrated on yourself. And if you're concentrated on yourself, you're going to be nervous. You're going to be self-conscious. So, be invested in your story. Say you want to tell a story about a contest called Funny Faces that's happening at a school. After you start the introduction, And so the principal announced the funny faces contest, and Mona's class had 20 students participating. What would you say after that? Akshay decided to make a squint-eyed face, and Simran just decided to put her lips into a straight shape. Your story's finished. Nobody's listening. You need to show them the funny faces. And the only way you're going to be able to show them the funny faces is if you are so committed to telling the story that you forget to worry about what your face will really look like when you make those funny faces. So the only way this story is going forward is Akshay did, and Simran did, and so on. Another thing, excuse me if I can get a sip. Another thing about being invested in your story is that you are able to make eye contact with various, if not all, the members of your audience. This is vital. There are people sitting here who have been expending time and effort listening to you. You have to acknowledge that. You need to thank them for their gift of attention. Here's the thing. When they notice you're looking, they listen a little bit better. They give you even more attention. And guess what? Your self-confidence is even more pumped. So, eye contact. Now, we know our audience. We are really invested in our story and we're going to tell it. After this, use all the resources at your command. What do you have? You got voice, you got gestures, you got facial expression. And silence. Silence is a tool too. But first, let's talk about voice, gestures, and facial expression. So you can alter the tone of your voice. You can alter the pitch at which you speak. You can make accents. You can speak at different speeds. And you can emphasize different words in different sorts of speech. Let me illustrate this by narrating to you the story of Minna. I'm tired of being a little girl. There isn't much to do. Just listen to the grown-ups. Minna this, Minna that. Minna no! I'll be a lamppost, so bright and tall and strong that people will look up at me. I'll look down all day long. They'll say, thank you for brightening the dark and scary nights. We wouldn't dare to go outside if there had not been lights. A lamppost. That's wonderful, said Pop, petting the pup. But when a pigeon poops on you, who will clean you up? Okay, I'll be a happy kite, light and bright and strong, flying the highest in the sky, trailing my string along. I'll stick my tongue out at all the other kites flying so low. And people everywhere will say, just look at Minna go! That's wonderful, said Granny. But when your string is cut, you'll fall in the tree. You will be stuck in a rut. The next morning, Toto said, Minna, who'll you be today? Don't be silly, Minna said. It's my bestest friend's birthday. Use your voice, gestures, facial expressions, and your story will come alive. Now for silence. Silence is one of the most potent weapons in your storytelling arsenal. I was teaching a postgraduate course to a bunch of 22 and 23-year-olds. This was the first time I met them. We had our introductions, and then I started teaching. I tried to start teaching. Here's what happened. One gentleman sitting right in front decided to interrupt me every 20 seconds. I let him for a bit. Then I said, could you please, maybe? Yes, ma'am. Okay, sorry. Now 6 minutes down, I haven't said a single sentence. At which point I said, something, you're an adult, and you might consider a little self-control. And maybe if you have these questions boiling in your mind, just write them down and we'll deal with them after class. But he didn't stop interrupting. I tried several strategies. Nothing worked. At last, he and I came to an agreement. He agreed that the next time he interrupted me, he would put his finger on his lips. He's 22 years old, don't forget this. But fingers move off lips, This guy. I said, okay, I'm not going to be able to teach. So I said, can I ask you a question? Yes, ma'am? Are you the youngest child in your family? What, ma'am? So I changed the question. Are you an only child? Ma'am, of my father? The whole class erupted. He turned every shade of red in every pore of skin that was visible. And I taught 1 hour and 35 minutes in complete peace. So use your weapons. When we have a great story, when we know our audience, when we are invested in telling our story, and when we can use our voice, our facial expressions, our gestures, and silence, then we get a chance to captivate our audience. Telling stories is about captivating your audience. It's about capturing their attention, their hearts, their minds, till their fists clench in rage as you say something. Or they're holding their breath in suspense. Or they're laughing till the tears roll down their faces. Sometimes, there are moments when, in the middle of telling a story, you stop being a storyteller. You stop being the person separating the story from the listeners. In that moment, you become the stories, and the listeners lose themselves in the story, in you. I invite you to become a captivating storyteller. I invite you to transcend yourself. I invite you to become the story. Thank you.